It is Tuesday, November 5th, 2019 at 9:30. This is a regular meeting of the Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning. Let the record reflect Commissioners Decker, Sobroff, Bonner, Figueroa, and Goldsmith are present, and we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. We'll proceed in order today with respect to item A. Commissioners, I've requested that the item with respect to the University of Southern California be pulled and put on next week's agenda as a separate item because I instruct there, so I'd rather have it be a separate item from which I can recuse myself. With respect to A, are there any questions? And again, pulling the matter related to USC. Any questions?
No.
Commissioners, very well. Are there public comment cards on item A?
Yes, we have 3 cards. We have Mr. Herman, Michael Novick, and Jonathan Foster.
Mr. Herman?
What number are we on?
Sir, we're on 1A. Please begin his time.
Thank you. Item number 1A, regular agenda items. Regarding these 13 approved donations from various criminal donors of various criminal departments related to the denial of rights under the color of law, for the record, which my understanding still remains 18 U.S.C. 242 and 18 U.S.C. 246, for the record, 42 U.S.C. 1983. I brought for the Inspector General a copy, for the record, Mr. Mark P. Smith, this 3-page document.
Sir, I don't believe you're addressing item A, which is donations to the department.
Donations related for events as set forth. Here you go. Thank you. Thank you so much. So let me stay on topic. Now, we got a total of 13 donations. The largest donation so far is $7,000. But the greatest donation is for $14,000 and a half. So we have to conclude that there's problems of stealing in the city of Los Angeles when it comes to the department's report on donations because they're not posted. Transparency has always been a part of the criminal element of hiding things from the public. So I'm in opposition for these donations because you don't state the criminal names and their departments of who's giving this money, like McDonald's.
For the record, these are my cards for public comment, 3 and 2, please. Thank you.
Mr. Novick.
A while ago you switched from having all these donations from the consent agenda into the regular agenda with the, I think, understanding that there would be discussion about these items and consideration of them, and now you're lumping about a dozen of them together. This 1A totals about $64,000. That's quite a bit of money. Again, I urge you to urge the donors to donate the money to things that would better serve the people of Los Angeles. In particular, I have a donation for Hollenbeck, which is quite a substantial donation to improve the morale of the officers in the Hollenbeck Division. I think you could do a lot to improve the morale of the officers in the Hollenbeck Division if they would stop killing so many Latino youth in their division and concentrate on easing their minds from that burden of guilt and responsibility that they have. And I think that you should break these out. You might find that onerous to have to approve each one separately, but that's the point. You should have each one as a separate item on your agenda and consider it on its own terms. And I think that in general, since you have such a huge budget for the department, you should stop soaking up all this other money that could be used much more beneficially for housing, education, job creation, feeding people. And I urge you to reject these donations and have the donors send them for better purposes.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Foster? I'll waive that one. You waive. That concludes public comment. Is there a motion to approve the report and accept the donation?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It passes 5-0. Item 1B, are there questions from commissioners?
No.
Seeing no hands, are there public comment cards?
We
on
have
1B?
two cards. We have Mr. Herman and Adam Smith.
Mr. Herman, and then Mr. Smith.
Good morning, Miss Decker. I'm here to state for the record the department's report regarding monetary donations, but they use a fancy word here called non-monetary donations. And this deals with 8 donations, considering the first item for the record was 13 donations. And I agree with the other speaker. This biased donations discriminates under the prejudice of 42 U.S.C. 1983 from those various donors. Because the benefit of these various area divisions, like you heard, Holland back, has been suppressing the community and depriving them of constitutional protection from biased policing. And the Los Angeles Police Department has no board action. Well, I'm the legislative body of the Brown Act, and I'm here to state for the record, under 54963, that's the end of the Brown Act. I forgot the number, but it deals with the ADA section of 202 for the record, reflecting the Los Angeles Police Department has set forth to approve the department's report to accept the donations, in which I'm in opposition. This is just fake news. I want an impeachment on all these donations. I want to know who's involved in these lies. I have a right to impeach every donor here to figure out who's bribing you as commissioners to mess up our communities under this department's report. I fear for my life. Thank you.
Mr. Smith?
Good morning. Echoing some of what M. Novick said, President Decker, I find it pretty disingenuous that this is how we're looking at these now. There's 8 donations just in this one item. If I wanted to speak to all of them, I would have to do 15 seconds each to do it under 2 minutes. So I can't obviously speak to all of them. C is talking about the Office of the Chief of Police donation, which is like $15,000 for data storage and graphic supplies. And I'm just wondering, Mr. Bonner, if we know what data storage looks like in the Chief of Police's office. F talks about the Major Crimes Division donation for the purchase of authorized emergency vehicle equipment to be installed in 4 undercover department vehicles. So, I don't know, do you guys know what authorized equipment going into 4 undercover vehicles is? Like, I don't know. This seems super disingenuous to take them out of consent agenda items like you're doing us a favor or you're being more transparent, and this seems like very much less transparent. You're accepting more money in less item numbers without any discussion.
Thank you, sir. That concludes public comment on that item. Is there a motion to approve the department's report and accept the donation? Second? Second. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Passes 5-0. Item C, Are there any questions from commissioners on item C? Seeing no hands, Madam Secretary, are there public comment cards on item C?
We have 3 cards. We have Mr. Herman, Michael Novick, and Jonathan Foster.
Mr. Herman.
Well, the recipients and purpose for these departments benefits for approval of 12 donations, and here's the purpose. Technical assistance, $10,000. Personal safety devices, $810. Hey, somebody's trying to touch me. Please don't distract me at the podium. This is my area of safety. Purpose of training, $5,000. Training, $2,594.58. Now, as far as child safety seats, $3,932.50. Training, $1,845. Civilian Appreciation Day, $2,000. Classroom modernization for the Airport Safety Division, $6,000 and $826.10 in chump change. And vehicle instructor course, $3,000. Gym equipment, $7,961.78. Lock It, Keep It program. Why don't you just call it Lock It, Shut Up program, $2,994. And then you got the community room, $4,500. Well, that's in Newton. In Boyle Heights, you can't even use the community room because the racist, prejudiced people there say if you're not a part of the stealing and corruption like Jose Weezer, you have no reservations to be a recipient on the purpose of these values of monetary donations. Am I on topic still, Miss Eileen Decker? Apparently I am, because I'm using this big fat book you had in the room back there, which you let me into the meeting late, which I couldn't read the information. In closing, 42 U.S.C. 1983, fuck it.
Mr. Novick.
Yeah, so 1C comes to about another $50,000 by my quick arithmetic. 1B was $38,000, 1A was $64,000. That's over $150,000 this week alone. This is money that should better be going to much better causes. This one in particular, I think Adam Smith already mentioned, there's a bunch of money for the data at the chief's office with very little explanation about what kind of data it is or who the data is being collected on. I think that this reflects the fact that in general the Police Commission acts as a rubber stamp for the police department, and so that's why the votes are always 5-0, which, as you know, is slang for the police, going back to the TV show Hawaii 5-0. So if people didn't get it, why I keep saying 5-0 after your votes, that's why. This one, this set of donations is from the LA Police Foundation, which we repeated to you over and over again. There's a conflict of interest around Steve Soberoff and that foundation and the LA Police Department. So I would urge you to, again, reject all the donations from the Los Angeles Police Foundation. They're not in the best interests of the department or the people of the city. And I think that you should, I realize that you don't want to do each one of these separately because you'd be here all day listening to public comment on every one. But that's the price of the job you claim to have taken on. And if you were not such a rubber stamp and everything else, then maybe people would let you rubber stamp these without comment. But we can't let it go by without it.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Foster.
Hi. In Los Angeles, they're going to continue to give the donations. I hope they go for great things. And part of my mantra is that what I've learned about government is we're missing so many trillions of dollars that we have to have donations made from private entities to the LAPD, and then so things get run around in the wrong direction with how policing goes. And Yeah, it's amazing how they have this little circle down here is the size of a human. I know it's very hard to see, but this whole big pallet area, you see the human beings down here, and this is pallets. This is what trillions of dollars looks like, and we're missing it. So we have to have the police department go out there and risk their lives for this stuff, and the Pentagon is taking us to the cleaners. And what I have learned in my life is this is what all my disparity comes from in my heart and in my mind about how the public acts, and then they're going to send out somebody with a gun to go pow, pow, pow somebody, and then and then I'm like, well, this pallet of money, all this money couldn't bring that life back. But if we had that money, then we could do things with the community so that it wasn't falling apart. So we even needed a police department. And then everybody gets to come up here and complain. And then a few people like say, rah, rah, good for the police, and I don't know where to stand sometimes. I love everybody on both sides, so I just wish, I think in LA, I wish we were talking about the truth. First is where is all the damn money?
Thank you, sir. With respect to item C, is there a motion to approve the department's report and accept the donations? So moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Pass 5-0. If there are any other, we don't have any other comment cards. If there are,
We received a late comment card, so that's moving to public comment.
okay, you can add it to public comment then. The item, you can read the first page of the agenda, sir. If you call out again, I'll have to excuse you from the meeting for interrupting the meeting. We're moving on. Sir, Mr. Khan, if you speak out again, you'll be excused from this meeting, sir. Item D, the department's report relative to the destruction of obsolete evidence and duplicate materials. Are there any questions from the commissioners? No. Are there comment cards on item 1D?
We have one card. We have Mr. Herman.
Mr. Herman?
Madam Chair, would you please advise me what number I'm on so I can stay on topic, please?
1D?
1D. Now, as far as I'm understanding the rubber stamp of the department's report for the destruction of various records, yes, they're duplicates, but according to my TRO, Mosley Courts cannot find my paperwork. Thank you. So we must keep records of these various divisions, such as the day I was arrested in Boyle Heights, for the record, to show the action of not just the board's action, but that of the Los Angeles Police Department that had me in handcuffs and threw me to the floor and kicked me under custody. Violation of my civil rights, but I took no action because, again, I'm only one obsolete original in this world. You'll never find another. And for that reason, the Los Angeles Police Department, the City of Los Angeles, in their retaliatory action, want to destroy our records, regardless of their duplicate. You know what it's like to get one of these free waivers and have your records and transcripts destroyed or misplaced? Welcome in, Chief Moore. Thank you for participating. So again, on behalf of Michael Moore, who's late and is now on record, thank you for listening if you did catch on to the report.
Thank you, sir. Is there a motion to approve the department's report and transmit?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes 5-0. The next item on the agenda, 1E, is the Executive Director's report regarding OPG storage rates. Questions from commissioners?
No.
Seeing none, are there public comment cards on item 1E?
We have 2 cards. We have Mr. Herman and Jonathan Foster.
Mr. Herman?
Yeah, we're all familiar with towing. Matter of fact, we're all familiar on bias towing. Why African Americans and minorities such as myself constantly have the problem with the garage towing and storage rates that we can't afford. Let alone there are people who are suing this city, one individual in particular, because the city removed his vehicle, that was his home, who was disabled and a veteran, and now is fighting this claim for the illegal police towing and storage rates. I find that apprehensible. Never in my life could I believe that this report dated November 5th, 2019, under BPC for cunt 190291 had the board's action of approval. I can't believe that. Not even Sandra wants to mention anything about her bad dealings. But again, the executive director's report does not reflect an interest of public concern. Because again, remember, as I noted into the record, that those of us under 18 U.S.C. 245 participating, enjoying the benefits, service, privilege program, activities under your towing bias discriminatory action needs to stop and end. Every human person has the dignity to sleep and live in their vehicle as long as you continue to gut Measure H funds and put it into your department as a general fund and recycle it back to bullshit. It's all bullshit. And for the record, again, it's all bullshit. Thank you.
Mr. Foster?
Hi, Jonathan Foster. I did learn something from Illuminati Beck. I have a recording of him talking about how the city had changed. And there's just so many more people here. And so more people getting pulled over and they're having their cars towed. And now the price is going up. And it just seems to go along with banking strategies that we got to keep raising the price and keep raising the price. The property taxes go up. There's more people. The more people commit crime, then we don't have enough room to put all the cars in there. So maybe we could raise the price, and so many people wouldn't have their cars towed. So if you raise the price, more people won't get their cars towed. It doesn't change how many people are going to get their cars towed. People are going to, lives are falling apart in all kinds of different ways. People making all kinds of decisions that get their cars towed. And then the police have a thing that they're doing that everybody's upset about to begin with. But so it doesn't make less cars get towed to raise the price. Why am I so able to see the rational? I can see both sides of the coin all the time. If I'm looking at the tail side, I'm seeing the head side all the time. How am I able to do this? So raising the prices isn't going to change anything. It's just making money. And I've already disclosed what they've already done. And this is going back to 1998. We're missing trillions of dollars that where if it was here in L.A., we really probably could have different sets of problems that we're dealing with instead of, I know people made a bad decision, so to speak, the way they got the laws rigged and everything. So somebody got their car towed, but they already don't have more money. I don't know. Think about it sometimes.
Thank you, sir. The requested action is to approve the executive director's report. Is there a motion to that effect? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. All opposed? It passes. The next item on the agenda will call the department up for questions and presentation. That's the department's report relative to efforts to reduce the number of bias policing complaints, which is as a result of the April 24th, 2018 2019 Board of Police Commissioner meeting directing the Professional Standards Bureau and Office of Operations to work together on this issue. Good morning.
Morning, President Decker, members of the Commission. My name is Mike Himes. I'm the commanding officer of the Internal Affairs Group. With me today is Deputy Chief Debbie McCarthy, who is the commanding officer of the Professional Standard Bureau, and Dr. Luann Pinnell, the director of training for the department. I'm going to try to do a little summary here, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Pinnell. Last year, you asked us to look more and use the data to try to formulate ideas on ways we can reduce the number of complaints instead of relying on mere statistical reports. In doing that, what we did is we did several different things. We looked at our number of complaints. We reviewed video, to try to identify some common behaviors that may lead to complaints. And then we provided that to personnel in training, and they looked at that too to see if there were any additional training needs that we were missing. What we found is that there weren't things that we weren't being trained in. We already know that we found two particular items that we found were in a higher proportion in biased policing complaints. And one was when the officer engaged in argument with the drivers or the people in the car, and the other one was asking people to exit the car instead of letting them stay in the car while they were doing their enforcement actions. That was a higher proportion in the complaints we looked at. And the way we came up with that is we identified the 5 highest divisions that had the most number of complaints. And those five highest divisions accounted for about 50% of the complaints in 2018. 2 of those were in South Bureau and 2 were in West Bureau. And then the third one was in Pacific Division. So what we've seen when we talk about reducing the number of complaints, what we've seen over time is that the numbers are fairly consistent. We average between about 275 and 310, per year of biased policing complaints. Interestingly enough, and this is kind of an anomaly, what we found so far in 2019 is with all our efforts, our concerted efforts to raise the awareness and heighten the awareness within the department regarding biased policing and perceptions and all the things we're doing to try to reduce the complaints, we've actually seen a rise in complaints so far in 2019. Now, I think that's primarily because of that heightened awareness and our supervisors looking much more in depth at when they're looking at video for other types of complaints, or just random review of video. They're finding things that maybe somebody yells out of the crowd, that the officers are racist, and they're going ahead and they're initiating a complaint based on that. Ridiculous. So. All those things considered, I think that we are seeing a heightened awareness in the department, regarding our complaints. As we've seen in the past, the great majority of the complaints are unfounded, or we determine with the amount of video that they're demonstrably false, or that in some cases we have insufficient evidence to adjudicate those. We do have some complaints that result in a disposition of not resolved, which means that we don't know whether it occurred or not. The reason for that is, as always, we can't, necessarily know what is in the mind of an officer, during their encounter. But if we don't have some independent corroboration one way or the other, a third-party witness, some video, some other types of things, when it just becomes unwitnessed, we will tend to not resolve those. Our goal is to not have not resolved complaints. It's to find out one way or the other. But we do have a degree of not resolved. In 2018, there were 3, which is very consistent across the years. We usually run about 3 to 5 of the complaints that are not resolved. In 2018, we had 274 complaints initiated. As I said, that's consistent with prior years. Probably the best thing to do is talk about what our efforts are, to reduce these complaints. So Dr. Pinnell has pioneered and piloted numerous operations. But before we get into that, one of the things we are doing that the commission did ask is that we look at our ACR process and include bias policing complaints. And we have developed a program which is set to go hopefully by the first of the year, where some of our specially trained supervisors can intervene and have a discussion with both the officer and the person who was stopped out in the field and try to resolve that. We'll still take a complaint, but we'll be able to dispose of that complaint at the scene. We have
Not use acronyms, I'd appreciate it. ACR is the
Oh, I'm
alternative.
sorry, alternative complaint resolution. Right.
Thank you.
And we also have, increased our efforts in mediation. And we've tried to make both programs, similar, to harmonize them so they cover both of the same operations. Mediation is typically after the fact. The alternative complaint resolution is typically in the field. And we are seeing an increase in both of those. Anyhow, Dr. Pinnell?
Thank you, and good morning. Some of the categories here in the report, we are responding to previous reports, and so I just want to say we are responding to those consistent areas of questioning, but also I think our efforts around procedural justice have allowed us to expand quite beyond the original questions of this report before. Some significant things that I think have happened this year is really getting in alignment with the efforts around procedural justice and using that as a methodology to minimize the opportunities for bias to come into play, and certainly emphasizing over and over the importance of fair and impartial policing and how we do whatever community contact that we have. So I think that a couple of foundational pieces that this year we also put out a leadership brief on procedural justice to kind of begin that conversation and start the source documentation. The chief of police has also directed that we put together a training bulletin on procedural justice, and we are finalizing that now. We have also had the opportunity working closely with Post Sacramento, and in the next, starting in January 2020, there will be 8 additional hours of what they call principled policing, which incorporates procedural justice and also implicit bias training into the academy, as well as an extra 4 hours where that concept will be played out in scenarios, in some of our various scenarios within the academy. So it'll move beyond just classroom training and into scenario-based training, which generally we find makes training much more effective and long-standing. We have continued our efforts in Police Sciences and Leadership 1 to reinforce with every academy class coming back at 11 months the concepts of procedural justice. And we are encouraged that Police Sciences and Leadership 2, when we bring the officers back 2 years later, we have a class that's going to go in December, and then starting some of the revisions will take place, and then starting in January every single month we will starting PSL 2. So, sorry, Police Sciences and Leadership 2. Again, trying to really emphasize in giving our officers a solid foundation within the first 5 years of their experience at LAPD. The other significant effort has been around formalizing and recognizing how to harness the information that we have with body-worn video. And so how do we make sure that we have trained both field training officers and also supervisors on what are they looking for when they are watching video, and how can they respond, and also have conversations with their officers, how to improve their responses and feedback. And that's also where we've worked closely with PSB and also the mediators from the city attorney's office in identifying what are the key factors that when they're in mediation and they're hearing the underlying issues of what led to a bias policing complaint, can we infuse that awareness into training for our supervisors and field training officers. So what we have begun to do, and we redesigned supervisor school in September, and piloted this already, where we have a 3-lens kind of framework to look at any body video that we look at. So we want them to look from a legal and policy perspective. We want them to look from a tactical considerations perspective. And we also want them to look from procedural justice. So as they're looking at this video, can they help the officers do better on a future contact by the feedback that they give to them? So that's an additional training process that we are engaged in right now, both for the supervisors and the field training officers, since those are the ones who are going to have the most direct day-to-day contact with the officers in the field. And then finally, one of the kind of innovative and exciting training efforts that we've done is we've engaged with the LAPOA, so Los Angeles Women Police Officers and Associates organization, and also with Pepperdine University on a 3-day community and law enforcement exchange of ideas, and they call it Community Cops and Conversations, so C3. And so in that training, we have 1 day of training that goes to our officers about communication skills and the community and even mediation and areas that we've had difficulty on in the past. And then we have 1 day of training with the community. And then on the 3rd day, they bring everyone together in various experiences designed to give each other an experience of what it's like to be in each other's shoes. So we've finished, we are able to do one of these sessions, one per bureau. So we have just finished the one in West Bureau and had both very positive comments from both the community and our officers. I think that's most of it, but I can answer anything else that you have.
Chief McCarthy, did you want to add anything to the presentation before we go to questions?
No, I just wanted to, the only thing I wanted to add is that we're really encouraging people to come to mediation, even if their complaints are not resolved or unfounded or demonstrably false, because we feel like by bringing people together and having them explain why they felt the way they felt has been successful. We had one recently that it was a demonstrably false, and the officer agreed to come to mediation, and ultimately the man who came to mediation thanked the officer for giving him a seatbelt ticket when he initially had complained because he about a week later got involved in a very serious traffic accident, and they said the only thing that saved him was the fact that he had worn a seatbelt because he had gotten this ticket. Now, that's not a common occurrence, obviously, but the whole point of it is that
Members of the public, please allow the presentation to proceed.
The point of it is that in an effort to try to bring people together, regardless of the outcome of the complaint, because frequently we don't know what is in either person's mind, but to bring them together and have them have an open, honest discussion about why they felt the way they did or why they did what they did is helpful, even if ultimately the complaint is unfounded or demonstrably false. We did find that based on that contact, the officer went back, shared that with his colleagues, and ultimately we had an increase in people willing to do the mediation because he said it was a very good experience. So we're trying to encourage that.
Thank you. Anything else from the panelists?
Open any
I know
questions.
there are a number of questions, but just briefly on some of the points that you made, and Dr. Pinnell, I think this may go to your portion of the presentation. You talked about the use of videos. I got from your presentation, it was by the supervisors and by the individual officer involved. I'm wondering if the videos are being used more broadly to share what is going on in the field and teach officers more broadly. Obviously, the identities of all parties would have to be concealed, but there's likely important lessons to be learned by putting together training videos. I'm wondering if that's going on as well.
So yes, again, making sure that we've gone through all the right processes and things like that. But the training videos are actually used in training right now, and so that while they're being trained on how to look at things, they actually have a couple examples that are played for them in the class, and then they write down their comments, and then we have a facilitated discussion on what we're looking at and maybe some different considerations, so that is, we're trying to increase their level of awareness as they're looking at these videos.
Okay. And could you elaborate further in the report and in your presentation? You talk about instituting procedural justice principles throughout the department. I wonder if you can elaborate a little more on how you're going about doing that.
I think systematically by getting our source documents in play, and additionally looking at all the different places where these inherently come up, whether that's in a community meeting or in other places. I think one of the things I didn't mention from the report is we've been talking about this quite frequently with command staff as well, and talking about both the internal procedural justice and the external procedural justice. So there's efforts on all our parts to increase the ability to listen and give each other a voice, and then increase the trustworthiness, not just internally in our department, but externally with our communities. So it starts with the source documents, and then we move it into...
When you say source documents, what are
sorry.
you referencing?
So sometimes that's the training bulletins, the reference material, but also, it moves its way into different audits or different... we will... once we have the source documents in place, then it will become a point of reference for promotional exams, and so that people will be infusing that into their opportunities for advancement as well. So it's a way of the department really highlighting that this is a priority for us. So we'll move them into our promotional exams and other opportunities throughout the department, but you will find it highlighted in every single promotional course of training that we have.
You talked in your presentation again about the principled policing program, the 8 hours, I believe it is. Could you provide a little more detail on what that is and what the goals of that are?
Sure. Post Sacramento has had this course for several years, but it hasn't been required as a state mandate to be in the academy as of yet. So it's an 8-hour course, but I think what is actually a little different about how they're infusing it into the academy is they're adding the extra 4 hours of scenario-based training where, and again, it would be through, for example, something like a traffic stop where they practice the principles of procedural justice through the course of daily interactions and responsibilities that they would have. So it will become a requirement in January, so every academy across the state of California will be required to have that additional 12 hours in their academy. And we are on track to do that. We've sent a number of our training cadre from the academy, but also from our police sciences and leadership program through the same Train the Trainer course through Post, so that we can ensure that we have competency and confidence in delivering this material.
Other questions, commissioners?
All right, happy. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm gonna ask a few questions about the report itself, and so if you have it available, it'd be helpful. I'm just going to do a page flip and go through a few questions, starting on what I believe is the first page of the report itself. Just a point of understanding that there's a chart at the bottom there that shows the total number of complaints initiated. Is this telling us that between 2016 and 18 that the total number of complaints has increased, but the number of biased policing complaints has gone down? Is that what this is telling us?
That was the experience initially on this. Obviously, this year it's changed. But if you recall, a few weeks back, we went over the annual discipline report, and we did talk about the number of complaints initiated and the increase in them in 2018 over 17.
And when you said this year it changed, remind me if you were just bringing this up to whatever the latest data is.
As I mentioned at the beginning, our biased policing complaints have increased in 2019. At the same time, our general complaints have increased about 8%, our public complaints. So if you look at that, we've got an increase of about 27% in our biased policing complaints so far this year, with an increase of 8% in our general public complaints. This is tentative preliminary information. So when you look at that shows that about 40% of the biased policing complaints are responsible for, I'm sorry, that the biased policing complaints are responsible for about 40% of the increase in our general public complaints
for 19
for 2019 on a preliminary basis.
And remind me also, did we have any information or preliminary information or otherwise about why that is?
Well, no, as I said, I think it can be attributed to just the heightened awareness within the department. I mean, our focus is very broad in trying to reduce bias policing or the perception of bias policing. Our supervisors, I think, are much more in tune to taking a complaint or initiating a complaint just based on an inference. Just the mere statement if somebody says, hey, we know what this is all about when they're stopped. They're more likely to start asking them the questions. Well, do you think it's because of, A, B, C, or D, and lead into that and then initiate a complaint. So I think, and I think at the same time, I think officers are much more aware if they hear somebody yell something out, they're going to tell the supervisor the complaint's going to be initiated. I think community members are more in tune with it. I mean, there's a variety of reasons that I think could be contributing to that increase.
Yeah, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but I think part of the point you're making is that it's a little bit counterintuitive, but even if we saw what might be characterized as a spike in bias policing complaints, not suggesting we did, but if we did, it may be because we're encouraging or getting more people to, not necessarily there's an increase in bias policing activity, but that we're doing a better job at getting that activity reported and addressed.
I think that's a fair statement,
okay.
Yes.
What also, can you, you may have addressed this in the prior report, but what is the process for if I'm stopped or a member of the public involved in an incident, what is the complaint process and how easy or cumbersome or time consuming is it for the member of the public?
Certainly. I mean, we receive complaints in many ways. Sometimes the allegation or the complaint is made at the actual time of the contact, at which point, the officer is obligated to call a supervisor who comes over and for a bias complaint has a certain number of questions that they have to ask. And, they do some dialogue and discussion with the member of the public in that, and that initiates the complaint. In other events, in our other incidents, what we see that later on we'll either receive a letter, we'll receive an email, they'll come into the station. I mean, any number of ways that we receive any type of complaint will occur. And then the same type of process occurs where there's
so on the front end, am I understanding you to say on the front end there isn't a formalized process where you're not required to fill out a form or go online and fill out a document, that a complaint can be as easily as verbally expressing the complaint?
Absolutely. We take complaints in any way, shape, or form, and if, at the scene of the actual contact, if somebody says, if the member of the public says they want to make a complaint, the officer is obligated to notify a supervisor and have them respond and take that complaint.
So the data we see here captures complaints that have a variety of origins.
That's correct.
Okay. And in terms of how they're handled, is the way in which they're handled, does that vary in any degree based on how the complaint originated?
No, not necessarily. In fact, even with bias policing complaints, even if the supervisor goes out there and talks to the member of the public and they decide that they don't want to make a complaint, we still take that complaint. And we do the investigation. What
I want to make sure understand is, say on the one hand, someone verbally expresses the complaint in the course of a stop.
Correct.
On the other hand, somebody goes home and writes a very detailed, comprehensive letter with attachments and documentation. Are those two complaints treated the same?
Yes, they are.
Okay. And in terms of the, I'm going now to page 5, I believe it is. And there was the discussion of, first question there is the discussion of the C3 program. What is, you mentioned also the that's community cops and conversations. What does the community element of that consist of?
Well, it actually started even with the design of the course, where we did some focus groups with the community and asked them what kind of input would they want. We were trying to bring, bridge the gap and create more trust between community and law enforcement. And so we started there with the input into the actual design of the course. And that's where they said, well, we would like some of the training that the officers get. And so that's why the whole second day is devoted to working with the community and then bringing them back on the third day.
And what I'm interested in also is how we're defining community and whether that's a consistent definition across the department, or does it vary by community, or that's what I'm looking for.
It's
is how,
varied by
how
every
culturally specific and how unique is that community part of it in each of these cases.
It's very varied by each bureau that we go to, and quite honestly, because we have not wanted to have law enforcement be the ones picking people that we know. We've leaned heavily on our outside partners, and specifically Pepperdine University, for canvassing and putting out a wide call for people to come. And certainly they work with the different people that the city attorney, the mediators there, have talked to and heard from. And so we are trying to get a varied kind of experience of community, but a lot of that is coming from Pepperdine.
Can you at some point, that's a particular issue that I'd like some further follow-up on, in terms, I think sometimes, at least my own experience, we have what sometimes proves to be a false sense of comfort when we're dealing with academia, like a university or a college university. Sometimes they're very good at what they're doing. Sometimes, in my opinion, they're not any better than anybody else. I don't know what the situation is here, but I would like to understand, to make sure that that we're all aware and agree with the approach and methodology that they're using as it relates to that
Absolutely. So
specific issue.
I can put something together and get that to Mr. T-Fink. Is that right?
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
On the bottom of page 5, there's in the last paragraph, there's a comment that in total 549 officers and supervisors were trained. Can you put that in context or perspective? I'm thinking of over 10,000 sworn officers in the department. And what is this? If you're putting this 549 in perspective, what does that mean relative to the full number of officers and supervisors in the department?
This was actually in response to the previous report from the Inspector General related to the GED and Metro stops. And so that's specifically why we addressed this group here. So it was intentionally focused on them. And so that's all the GED, Metro officers and supervisors were included in there. So now, as I mentioned before about the training that's going on with supervisors and field training officers, we took some of the best practices, lessons learned from doing that training, and incorporated that into the training that will now go to the FTOs and supervisors.
Okay, thank you. On page 6, one question in here, there's pages 4 through 6 for this page in particular. There's a kind of a summary of the different types of training and initiatives that are being looked to here. And one other question I've asked in other contexts, but this in particular is, are we also, do we have now, or are we devising a methodology to make sure that we know how to measure the impact of the training? So we could, look at periodic, after the fact, aggregate numbers of complaints, but it doesn't really tie back to, the input, which is, the training that you're describing for us, and really what we know about, what happens on the other end. So are we, or I'm thinking also of the it's good that there's going to be training in the academy and those kinds of things, but I'm concerned a little bit about training programs that, like, I myself have been involved in, where you participate in the training, you maybe even have a little quiz at the end, you check the right, the box, but as years go by, you don't necessarily internalize, everything that you've learned in a discrete training element. So, kind of broadly characterize what we're going to be doing to make sure that we can have that consistent tie between the input and the output.
Certainly. I think, again, especially on something like bias, which is sometimes difficult and people define it differently and things like that. So I think certainly by training the supervisors and getting a heightened awareness and conversation about it, we're also going to be getting that feedback as they look at videos and can bring that back around to training. I think the other piece that we do is we work closely with our partners both at PSB and the city attorney's office about the mediations and how are those progressing? What are we seeing differently and how are people engaging? And the themes that continue to come up, we can start infusing some of those real life scenarios and examples into training as soon as possible. I agree with you, sir. It's a very hard thing to measure. And especially when we send people to 21 different geographic divisions, we rely heavily on the feedback from the divisions on the kinds of experiences they're having and then what results in a complaint or not.
In the going at the top of page 6, there's says develop command staff experts in engaging with the community, and then it's referencing the 3 hours of training that some of the command officers are. We're not. This isn't saying that after 3 hours of training you're an expert in
No,
this
sir.
issue, is it? Okay.
No.
So
The
Describe that a
terminology
little
came
bit.
from the previous report that asked us to do this and that, so we kept the terminology the same from the previous
the
report.
terminology of the
Of what was requested in the recommendations, I think, and the request to have command staff trained. So this was, what I would say is probably an ongoing effort, and this was focused specifically at community meetings and how to conduct them, something more focused than we had done in the past in terms of looking at community, either relationship building or trust building, to focus specifically on the meetings themselves. How do you create trust in a specific community meeting?
Got it. Okay. In the next paragraph, there's the reference to the bias policing complaint overview in the video. This is something that's still in process, it sounds like. Can you comment a little more specifically on the timeline and the level of priority that's getting?
So one of the challenges we have right now is I have several Senate bills that all have January 1st deadlines and a very small staff. So we are going to continue to work on this, but we have to make sure that we meet these Senate bill deadlines by January 1st. For example, SB 978, which is the posting of our training material, and that is kind of an all hands on deck kind of thing. So I would look at the early in January, February, March, in that area.
So it's a Q1? It's a first quarter deliverable?
First quarter. There we go.
Thank you. And then in the next one, ongoing training initiatives, there's a reference to every police sciences leadership class continues to receive this training. Can you put some quantification on that? How many, how often?
So we bring back recruit classes at 11 months after they have graduated. So that's roughly 450 officers a year who come back. So what we are creating is a funnel, if you will, that every officer in their first year will receive this training.
And this brings up another question. When we think about like the 450 a year, that sounds to me like kind of a broad prophylactic approach where you're just trying to make sure that you're getting 450 through every year. The question really is, when you think about, I don't know how well we're doing in identifying the data and seeing if there are particular officers that have, a larger number of complaints or a large number of complaints that have been found, valid or justified, and are they getting any increased level of training than, say, others that are kind of just coming through a cycle?
So yes, and I would want to clarify, police sciences and leadership is a significant effort on the part of the department. We're not required to do this by post, but we recognize that we want to give our officers a better foundation in their early years before they get into any kind of pattern of conduct that is more concerning. So we are trying to get on the front end of it. It is not to get 450 people through a year, sir. I would emphasize that what we're trying to do is to get every officer this exposure, not just once in their academy. They'll have it in the academy, they'll have it in PSL, they'll have it in future training, and then as they promote. So for, I'm sorry. I lost track of words. Those who are subject to repeated complaints. So one of the things that we did with the C3 training is to make sure that we incorporated officers also who had some complaints. Not all of the officers there had complaints, but some of them did. We wanted to make sure that we made an extra effort to incorporate people who had had complaints in the past. And that is a strategy that we do in each of those areas as we go to those bureaus.
Got it. Okay. On the page 7, there's the discussion of the alternative complaint resolution, the pilot program. this is going to take place over 3 years, starting next year, so 2020 through 23. And is there a plan for any periodic or ongoing assessment of the program, or is the intention to take a look at it at the end of the pilot period?
Well, one of the factors, or one of the steps within an alternative complaint resolution in the field, is to do a follow-up questionnaire regarding satisfaction with the participants, and we'll measure that on an ongoing basis. We've had this system in place for some time. What we're doing in this is now adding bias policing complaints into it, which was not in existence before, which was not allowed before, although that
just
was
in the alternative.
That's correct. Mediation has had bias policing complaints, but the infield ACRs, or alternative complaint resolutions, did not, and that's what this is in addition to be able to do that in the field.
Got it. Okay. And then finally, just stepping back, just a little bigger picture, one of the growing areas of interest and concern that I have, and the chief and I have talked about this, and we're going to talk about this issue. We've talked about it in the context of unreported crimes. And in here, I'm concerned also about the potentially vast sea of unreported complaints, or complaints, experiences that people have that simply don't result in a complaint for whatever reason, right? So the broad question one is there some application, just the very concept? So in the case of crimes, we know there is this dark space of unreported, crimes, and in fact, there's been victimization surveys over the years to try to dig a little deeper to get a better sense of why people don't report certain crimes and what we know about them. Does that construct apply also in this area of complaints, where there are people who are just potentially, or at least they may feel that they're not being treated fairly? And again, we should be concerned about that feeling and whatever led to it, but it may not result in a complaint. And in particular, I'm thinking of the experience, say, of a 12 or 14-year-old kid, or just those who are the most powerless or the least powerful among us, who may have some interaction with the police, but are not going to assert themselves in a way that brings them into a process of mediation and so on and so forth. So I'd like to hear some conversation just broadly about that construct of activity that's not going to result in a formal complaint, and what we're thinking about it.
Well, certainly. I mean, I would imagine that there's people that feel like they're treated unfairly, during a contact with the police. One of the things that we do is we are encouraging people to make those complaints if they do feel that way. At the same time, as I mentioned, we have supervisors now who are reviewing body-worn video and those types of things. And if they get a perception from watching that video for other reasons other than investigating a complaint, that there may have been that type of reaction or feeling, we have seen those complaints initiated, as I said, based on the inference or that type of perception. As far as kids are concerned, I think what we see sometimes in those events is we'll have a parent that will report it. The kid will go back home and talk about being stopped, and the parent will contact us and report that. I don't think we're ever going to capture everybody that feels like they were treated poorly. Police contacts are inherently potentially negative, right? But we don't want them all to be that way. And sometimes people perceive that if they get a ticket or whatever it may be. Some people feel
Excuse me, if I can.
Sure.
just
One thing I
mention-
was going to point out, at least with regard to children, and this is, I've had a number of conversations with parents who, for some reason, say that in many cases they hear about these things long after the fact. That they're shocked when their son or their daughter will tell them at 16 that something that happened to them, with the police at 14, or so there's that, sensitivity, is that we can't assume that everyone will just run home and I'm just pointing out that there's a lot of complexity, I think, more so than what we might. Please.
I agree. There's a lot of complexity, and I think that the effort that we're really trying to get better at. When we look at procedural justice, the effort to be more, to infuse trustworthiness, respect, neutrality, and a voice, and that piece of listening and hearing people's voice on the front end, ideally. And we have seen some body video that is really pretty powerful, where things started off very negatively, but because the officer heard them out, listened to them, encouraged them to share their perspective, and at the end of it, the kind of recognition of, I understand, or thank you, it's pretty amazing to see some of those interactions come full circle when we hear each other out. So we're hoping that also by training and enforcing and encouraging that response from officers to take a little more time, to listen a little longer, that we can have better outcomes before it gets to a complaint.
Thank you. Thank you. And by the way, Chief, did you have any thought on the question of, does the contract, or does that construct, the issues around unreported crime, does that apply? When you get to the issue of complaints, can you speak to that briefly?
Well, we see that, I would just reference community sentiment. When we look to community surveys of all communities, we see a level of distrust. We see instances in which people report anonymously through those surveys that they feel they were disrespected, or the officers profiled them or were engaged. And that's why I'm hopeful that with the most recent effort under leadership of Chief Grimala to achieve a regular and ongoing survey instrument that can check sentiment and can check it by and look through communities of all communities, including ethnic makeup of communities and gender. I think the other point of this is that our youth program, our efforts in high school, our efforts in junior high school, those efforts are not just through the cadet program, not just through the youth programs that you've heard through the community safety partnerships, but we're currently in an effort with LA Unified and an organization in South Los Angeles called Bridges, where we'll have, much like Days of Dialogues are between adults, we'll have with young high school aged young people and police. We have long been a partner with Constitutional Policing, where Cops and Kids, program of officers and young people coming together and having officers an opportunity for procedural justice to see and feel and hear each other and see each other's perceptions of the other as they play out and role play. So there's a number of opportunities in those contacts, youth CPAPs, community police advisory boards that are particularly was a strong relationship in Southwest under leadership of Captain Leland Sands, ongoing year after year, a group of young people, high school leaders within Dorsey and a few other locations in South Los Angeles that come together, sit down with law enforcement, the senior leadership of Southwest, and talk about the encounters where a friend, third party many times, fourth hand, talk about an interaction that did not go as well as it should. And then lastly, I'll say that I'm proud of the membership of employee organizations, particularly Noble and Able, who have assembled a series of dialogues with young people and police officers to talk about Know Your Rights, modeled after the NAACP program, the ACLU programs that talk about individuals, young folks, understanding what their rights are when and responsibilities of interacting with police, and when things don't go as a young person expects that they should have, the steps to be taken. And those steps are affirmative and responsible, and not to swallow it or just accept it as the way of the state of affairs.
That's very helpful. One final, request or suggestion I would make is we had the conversation a few weeks ago when you were presenting the complaint report, and we had the conversation about how we can work together to make that even more impactful. And I'd like to pull a lot of these thoughts together as we, in preparation of the next complaint report, to have it be something that speaks a little more to the context around and qualitative factors around these issues, aside from just reporting of the raw data.
And just I'll add, I think the next opportunity we have as a shift in growth is the expansion of the ACR, alternative complaint process. As a reminder to this board, the current mediation process has...
Excuse me, sir. Please don't shout out, sir. Sir, please don't shout out, Chief.
The current...
Sir, if you continue to shout out, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I'm asking you not to do that.
The current mediation program under the leadership of the City Attorney's Office oftentimes results in delays, significant delays between the party who feels aggrieved and has filed a complaint for bias policing and our ability to bring officers in. And so the expansion of this establishment of this pilot program, which has taken admittedly well over a year for us to pull together, allows for properly trained individuals under a select set of circumstances and where a person feels that the actions of the officers were biased, to have that immediate interaction with the involved officer and the supervisor and that complainant to see if that closing of distance of time can get better post results where both sides of this interaction feel improved, that the other understands what occurred and that they have a better understanding of why the actions of the others were perceived. Clearly to us, as we're looking at, and I'll close, clearly to us as we look at a survey of these bias policings where we see in our assessment of it an acceleration of an argument with a motorist, an individual that escalates into a debate which then results in an adverse interaction between an officer and a motorist. And the other one where in that interaction then the person is asked to step out of the car. That we see those as avoidable set of circumstances in many instances. So just recently, with the meeting with the league, we have come to agreement where we will be able to inspect non-enforcement stops on body worn and review those from a lens of how was the interaction with the motorist, how was the interaction with the pedestrian, and was there an explanation? Were they listening? Were they giving the person voice? And was there a perception of fairness? And those are instances that previously we'd have no understanding of or visibility unless the person made a complaint. And to your point, many instances they may not. So we'll be regularly looking at those instances to identify opportunities that we did it well, and also opportunities where we feel there's an interaction, we need to have an interaction with an involved officer because their conduct is such that we think it's becoming marginal and they're going to go and they're slipping into an area where there's absolutely ripe room for criticism.
Correct, even in the absence of
that. Absolutely. That's the preventive measure. And then lastly, with aspect of that also is I fully expect to find many instances where the officers are engaged in a heartfelt and productive manner. And I want to bring those in front of our officers as well to demonstrate in a positive manner how the conduct of our officers reinforces this issue of fairness.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Goldsmith?
Thank you. You took most of my questions, Dale. Appreciate that. No, it was very good. But I do have a few more questions. So first, I just want to acknowledge the hard work that's gone into this and just thank the department so much for taking this so seriously and for both acknowledging that bias policing is a serious problem and devoting so many department resources at the highest levels of the department in terms of leadership and actual programming and just very comprehensive approach to addressing this. I think that demonstrates a strong commitment to really changing the way things are done. And all of this is very good. Other commissioners have commented, but especially glad to see the supervisors reviewing the body-worn video and taking the lessons learned from that into training and taking those insights into developing this comprehensive approach throughout the department. In terms of mediation, you said that you have been encouraging folks to participate, and that seems like it's working. More people are participating. Is there data on that in terms of just increased engagement in mediation?
I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure I understand the question. We have seen a steady increase in mediations year to year. I think in 17, I believe we had 39 or so. Last year it was 52 in 18, and so far this year we're just about at 50 now.
Great.
And so we're hoping for 60 plus, which is a good proportion of the number of complaints. That we actually receive.
We found early on that it was hard for people to get. We would do them downtown, so we try to bring the mediation to them. We try to make it at a time and a place convenient for the complainant because we want them to participate. We want the officer to participate. And if they make a complaint, frequently it's hard to get people to cooperate in general. But also to say, do you want to come to mediation? Oh, by the way, you have to park downtown. it wasn't working. So we tried to bring the mediation to them. And we think by doing the ACRs in the field, contemporaneous to the incident, we'll have even more success because we'll get further cooperation.
Okay. And we talked a little bit about the ACR, but is there, could the department come back to us at some period of time after which you feel like you've established the pilot and seen some results and share some reflections with us?
Of course.
Certainly.
Great. Maybe like 6 months or so. Very good. What else? I also just wanted to lend my voice to what Commissioner Bonner was raising in terms of the experiences that don't result, the negative experiences that don't result in complaints, and we've talked about that enough, but just want to add my voice to everyone that I've ever talked to that's had a really negative experience with the police has not complained, and particularly, I hear those stories most often from young Black and brown people and who would never consider complaining. So I appreciate that the department's approach is to assume that that's happening and make sure these approaches are comprehensive enough to get even to those circumstances, and hope that we'll increase that and continue to take that into consideration. Also, I know we talked a little bit about the issue of kind of how do we know this is working, and you talked about how complicated that is, and I agree with all of that. But obviously, you wouldn't. You must have some way of, even if it's qualitative and anecdotal. You're not going to deploy all these resources and just hope for the best. I'm sure that you have ways to that you use to make sure that you're making progress over time. Can you share a little bit more about kind of the maybe they're informal, or how do you know this is working? It's a lot of resources to deploy.
I think most of it comes from the officers themselves, both when they engage in training and they share those. And like you're saying, that's probably the hard thing to quantify is the anecdotal information that you hear both from officers but also from community members as we do community meetings. And I think everyone would say that we're not where we want to be, but we're not where we were. And so I think there's kind of a shared commitment to moving forward and continuing to improve. Again, we want to combine the new surveys that we're getting from the community and keep moving that into training. But right now, again, some of the quality of interaction that we've had with the community, where they are also now willing to connect and participate and be involved, is also a measure of, I think, some of those efforts.
Mm-hmm. And we have the bias policing coordinator here. She may be able to answer some questions about some success stories or what she's seen, if you're interested in hearing what she has seen in terms of success and mediations that have gone well and how it's gone back to the divisions and resulted in additional mediations.
I'm sure if there are a couple maybe themes that haven't been elucidated so far, wouldn't.
Well, and I would just add to this issue and this dialogue, I think where the board is really coming from is we greatly appreciate all the efforts that are being put into all these multitude of programs, but how do we know that's the right way to allocate the resources that's most effective and meaningful to the community and to the officers involved? And based on the conversation, it's clearly not to get the number of complaints to be lowered, because we want to encourage people and we want to encourage supervisors to be filing these complaints so we can identify the issues, and particularly very early. So it's not the number of complaints that will drive success. We need or are looking for another way to analyze whether the different programs and the resources being put into them are getting the results that everybody wants. And that's, it may be a combination of anecdotal stories, but I think what we're looking for is a broader way to measure how do we know that this is the right way to allocate the resources. And I'd ask you all to put some more thought into that. I don't necessarily expect you to have that answer today, because some of these programs are going into effect on January 1st. Some of them are mandated by the state. But I think we need to, particularly going forward, have a better understanding of how do we know this is the right way to put all the resources to get results and to gain greater trust within the community. Maybe it is, as the chief alluded to earlier, some of the community surveys that are going on, but I doubt that will reflect the breadth of the work you're doing and whether every program's successful. I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's
Did
great.
I get?
Yes, thank you.
Commissioners, I do think that in fairness to this team, that this is an issue that, as we look across the 21st century policing principles and pillars and that report from then President Obama, that we are dealing with community engagement as a means of building trust and understanding and identifying instances of bias and how we react to that and respond, and to eliminate whenever possible. What are our strategies and engagement with the public? That's part of it. And how responsive are they to best practices and what we recognize as things that deter from trust, or and for instance, just as recently, our recent change relative to Metro and how we use Metro is related to this conversation. I'm very pleased and impressed by Dr. Pennell and Deputy Chief Baeza, their efforts to blend procedural justice into all aspects, from the day a person is hired, including before that, assessing them for their emotional intelligence, through promotional processes, through selections, and whether we revisit them as they come out of the academy. We deal with this as in discipline. We deal with this as the consequences of interactions when they don't go well. I think all of those are part of the health of this issue of how we're dealing with implicit bias and the beliefs and the lack of support in some communities of law enforcement that our motives are pure. Getting an exact measure of that is a very, I think as soon as we measure one area, we open ourselves up to, yeah, but what about this? And we're open to a scorecard that I think reflects a broad spectrum, and I think that we would look to also the expansiveness of these conversations sometimes involve, for instance, on another subject, homelessness, where we end up with 30, 40, 50 pages of various measures and observations and snapshots. And then the question is, well, what's the focus? What's the 3 items? What's the 4 items? So today, it is, I will say to Dr. Pennell's remarks, we're better than we were. 5 years ago, getting post-survey results of officers as they came out of this type of training was something to be desired. Today, it's cooked into every training class. What was your perception to the officer as to the validity of this training, and to the community member, the validity of this training? Why we do that, of course, is because we want the person to understand we value their input, but also to make adjustments in the delivery that we've seen when we think we're talking and we're actually talking but not being heard. Just a couple observations.
Mr. Soboroff?
Yeah, I have a question, but it's specifically to Lieutenant Dan Gomez, who's here today. Dan's been involved with body cameras from the get-go. You've got 25 years in technology and other areas important to us.
Sir, please don't shout out again. Mr. Soboroff?
Dan, as the body worn was created and the expectations, one of the thoughts was on these specific issues of incidents of complaints against officers, whatever it is. As you look back now and see how they're performing in relation to these kinds of incidents, do you have any suggestions for any changes? Are you do you see the benefits are pretty obvious when things are recorded. Do you see anything we can be doing better?
Thank you, Commissioner. Lieutenant Dan Gomez, Innovation Management Division. So I think that the committee, and I haven't read the report, but I think they've addressed most of the issues from a technology standpoint. What we see is the body-worn cameras, the video quality is getting better, the audio quality is getting better. All the things that the fact that we're capturing all of the video now at a very, very high rate just provides more information for this committee and for the department to look at all aspects. I think there's the value in it is right there kind of in front of us. We knew that the technology would progress just to help in these areas. I don't see anything changing. I think that it's advancing at a rapid pace and is going to continue to move forward. It's just going to support the department's efforts.
Good. Thank you, sir.
Any further questions? Madam Secretary, how many public comment cards do we have on this item?
11 cards.
11.
The first 5, Michael Novick, Mr. Herman, Gina Viola, Jonathan Foster, and Tabitha Jolivet.
So first of all, I want to say that there's a fundamental flaw in this because the problem is not just implicit bias or individual bias. The problem is that the police enforce a system of white supremacy, racial exploitation, and oppression, gender discrimination, and so that's the problem. Within the context of this thing, I think that you're looking at trying to reduce complaints, and the historic way that LAPD has tried to reduce complaints of bias and is by finding them unfounded, 0% founded. So then, of course, people are discouraged from filing complaints. I'll point out a couple of things. There's a footnote that says that one of the proposals was to have civilian mediators working for the city attorney's office, where people facing complaints wanted somebody outside, and they couldn't do that because they can't find enough volunteer mediators. So why don't you take some of the money you've been funding the police with and use it to hire community-based mediators who are not responsible to the city attorney or the police? The city attorney filed a appeal of the judicial ruling that you can't criminalize homelessness when you're not providing homes for people. And the county is doing the same thing. So when you have a system where practically half the homeless people are black, and you're enforcing laws against basically being homeless, then that's what the root of your problem is. I do think that the general orientation here is about CYA. It's about reducing the number of complaints, and it's about propaganda. If the police department is able to do the mediation outside of downtown, and the police are holding these town hall meetings in different areas of the city, the LA Police Commission, the Board of Police Commissioners, should take a lesson from them and get these meetings out of here, and then you might hear a lot more complaints coming to you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Herman?
2 affidavits in complaint to bias policing. Under the color of law, 18 U.S.C. 242, 18 U.S.C. 245, 42 U.S.C. 1983, depriving the public the right to enjoy their community. Complaint resolution findings.
You're not addressing the subject matter on the
Yes,
agenda,
let
sir.
me get to the topic, baby. This has to do with the acronym, as you mentioned earlier in the morning, ACR, Alternative Cunts Retaliation. For the training in Pepperdine 3C, 8 hour plus 4 equals 12. I can count. COL, that is a crime to violate the rights of citizens under the color of law to update the course of mental health intervention.
You're not addressing the matter.
Madam Chair, on page 6, it says here the course of mental health intervention training and going intervention training. I know what the fuck to read when I'm on topic. Again, conviction for mere advocacy must not suppress the speaker at the podium. Bain Act, Bagley-King Act, the Brown Act. I'm here
Sir,
to
the matter
speak
before
on
the
the
commission
hour
is the
of
effort
timing of the initiatives
bias
regarding
policing complaints.
bias
If you cannot address
police,
that matter, you
while
need
the
to sit down,
implicit
sir.
bias is a concept to misunderstood. The misunderstanding alone does not provide training. That reason, we are fucked. 42 U.S.C. 1983. For the record, Mr. Mark.
Your time is up, sir. Mr. Viola, Ms. Viola, I'm sorry, you're next, ma'am.
I'm resisting the urge to just light this on fire and throw it. I just don't even know what to say. 25 officers had 2 or more biased policing complaints. Is that marginal conduct? I'd like to see in this report what happened with those officers an explanation of that, not that it's merely mentioned? And is that marginal conduct? And it makes me wonder how many complaints Ryan Lee and Martin Robles had against them before they killed Grishario Mack. I imagine it is difficult to get to mediation downtown during the week. It's difficult to get anything from the police. The result of all these complaints is that they were all found unfounded, demonstrably false, mediated, insufficient evidence to adjudicate, not resolved. How can that be? How can that be? Has anybody taken statistics in this room? Every time we have one of these reports, I ask that question. I don't even get it. This doesn't support the many recent reports about tens of thousands of police officers on Facebook groups with hateful ideologies. If you want to give me a report on biased policing, address that. Address that fact. Where's the information about that? We have that here in this city on the west side, Topanga, right? Malibu. We know there are LAPD officers on hateful Facebook groups, yet no mention of that in this report. It seems to me on your training plan to reduce bias policing, you're focusing on procedural justice, tactical considerations related to procedural justice. Who's watching these videos concerned about who's being harmed by police? That's nowhere mentioned in here. What I see is just a way to stop the LAPD from getting sued. That seems to be your primary focus. It's not about the damage you're doing to anybody. My God,
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Foster?
The 2 minutes is never enough. Right. And my heart rate goes up every time I come up here. I can't catch my breath sometimes. And what happened to Eric Rivera is real biased policing, isn't it?
That's right.
I mean, they hadn't even assessed a crime scene. My God. Well, I want to say, though, people are going to complain. The human being is a complainer by nature, and it's paralleled with survival. It's why it complains. It wants to survive, and the police don't give them that feeling sometimes. God's word has the human rising above survival mode. Mm-hmm. But some people, however, have a real complaint. You see, they have real complaints. And this is the difficulty with policing, is dealing with dialogue that turns personal. Right. Mm-hmm. But sometimes the police are the one that really has the problem. I have to state that because of civil rights groups is the only reason there has been this much change in policing. Otherwise, you guys weren't going to change. Bill of Rights always states rights, but the human actually acts far from what's written. The states, the counties, the cities all seem to have statements about how everyone's equal under the law, and the commission seal has a balance there, and dealing with police officers takes on a different set of civil rights. Now that when you've become a suspect, you have lost some of your civil rights. In part, so you've changed who you are. So they can be mean and rude and do interrogation procedures on you. Good cop, bad cop. So that mode of operation is now the new civil rights for those moments. The human operates contrary to what's written. And this is, maybe my statements might help change that. But for sure, without the civil rights groups yelling and screaming, nothing was going to change.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Joliet?
Chief Moore, how do you propose, Dr. Purnell, you too, all of you commissioners, Shane, since you've spoken so self-congratulatorily today, how do you propose that Keith Bursey, Grishario Mack, and Albert Ramon Dorsey engage in your mediation and alternative complaint resolution program? You stole them from their families and from us. And Chief Moore, even when the commission, which very rarely this happens, agreed that there was out of policy action, you've done nothing. So this report represents nothing but gaslighting. You are gaslighting black and brown people who are victimized by your policing system. You are gaslighting our children who are traumatized by your presence. So stay away from them, stay out of our schools, stay out of our universities, stay out of our colleges, and stay out of our communities. because your commitment to neutrality is precisely the problem. Your unwillingness to engage, for example, Dr. Purnell, in your own academic training to be truthful in reporting. To, first of all, extend to this community an acknowledgement of your extraordinary limitations in this report. You don't even adequately disaggregate data. This is untrustworthy by any researcher's core values. And you and I both know that because we both are doctors. So I want to start with that comment to you. Secondly, your entire report masquerades your epistemological and ontological assumptions because you are invested in reproducing the status quo without regard for analyzing hierarchies of power, which are produced and constrained and recalibrated by every single person standing in this room, including all these officers that you have surrounding us and surveilling us and silencing us, especially those of us who are people of color like Dr. K. You didn't say anything to Herman when he was off topic and having outbursts, but you tell Dr. K every time to shut his mouth. That's a real problem. So you can save your report.
Please have a seat, ma'am. Please have a seat. Thank you, ma'am. Please have a seat. Who are the next three speakers, please?
The next three speakers, Zach Sherwin, Adam Smith, and Hamid Khan. Again, Zach Sherwin, Adam Smith, Hamid Khan, followed by Jamie Garcia.
Mr. Sherwin. Sir, please stop shouting out. Sir, Mr. Sherwin, please.
We do not consent to the assumptions of your
Thank you. Thank you. If there is another outburst, either by Dr. Jolivet or Jolivet, my apologies, or sir, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name, but another outburst, I'm going to ask you to leave. Mr. Sherwin, please. Public. Sir, another outburst from you, and you will have to leave as well. Mr. Sherwin, are you going to use your time, sir? Sir? Mr. Sherwin? Please reset. There we go.
After all that, I'm glad the community is getting a chance to speak. I want to start by talking about the title of this report. If there are complaints about biased policing, then the thing to try and address and reduce is not the complaints, it is the biased policing. It's, if a nerve is sending pain signals, then the thing to do is not to mute the pain signal, but to address the cause of the trauma. So where is a report on efforts to reduce biased policing? And some efforts to reduce biased policing could include doing things like not disproportionately stopping black people in traffic stops, and when this board finds officers out of policy, doing something about it, Chief Moore. And in addition to Ryan Lee and Martin Robles, Edward Agdepa, who was found out of policy by this board in the killing of Albert Ramon Dorsey, the murder of Albert Ramon Dorsey. This report itself exhibits bias. On page 4, there are characterizations of the public and characterizations of the way police officers interact with them. The public is characterized as sometimes behaving in a, quote, very hostile manner. In a footnote, officers allowed the drivers to vent. So the picture being painted is that these drivers are these furious, flying off the chain individuals. Officers responded, in contrast, by, quote, engaging the complainants in argument. And I think that the disparity between those two characterizations is telling. I resent that anecdote about the community member who came back and thanked the police for giving him a seatbelt ticket so he would wear his seatbelt in the future. That is not a win for ACR and certainly not for the police department. It's a win for seatbelts, but I don't think citing that anecdote makes your case stronger. I also resent the proud brandishing of the ratings that program participants give their trainings. The question is not what these officers think, 8.9 versus even an impressive 9.6 or whatever it is. The question is, what does the public think of the results of that training? And the fact that biased policing complaints are going up can be construed to mean that people don't really feel like this is working. The report begins and ends with a call to build public trust. Fire Martin Lee and Martin Robles.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Yeah, I listened to most of that presentation and could really use some vinaigrette for that word salad. Am I right, Mike? When I think of I've been observing these meetings for 3 years now, observing these presentations and the questions that come from the board. And I think of, I think of right now, I'm thinking of words that Dr. Melina Abdullah brings up a lot, where when we talk about police abolition, of which, I've grown to become a police abolitionist, is that there's reformist reforms and there's non-reformist reforms. And so I see these presentations and you all talking about bias policing reducing bias complaints as reformist reforms. I think about when President Decker didn't let me speak on 1C, and none of you brought anything up there. There was a $10,000 donation going to a consultant named Joan Brody, who's been around the LAPD since the beginning of predictive policing with Chief Bratton. So you can talk about bias policing, but when you're reinforcing these structures and not even actually looking at the impact on the street, which Jamie Garcia from the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition brings up all the time, and I try to really think about the impact that we see when we're meeting families. And so you can pat yourselves on the back when you find officers out of policy. You can pat yourself on the back with talking about these, having these hard-hitting questions about bias policing. But when Chief Moore doesn't do anything to Edward Akdeba and Martin Robles and Ryan Lee, it's not you guys whose hands are clean. You're complicit in upholding this structure that sees black bodies as nothing more than criminal and worthy of dehumanization and death.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Khan? And after Mr. Khan, who are the next three speakers?
Jamie Garcia, the Red Chief, and Akili.
Thank you.
I wonder what Sandra Bland would have said. If just bringing Sandra Bland, present in our moment. But I think what's really interesting is that, of course, the white woman over there, Eileen Decker, whose life is rooted in bias and prejudice. And how dare, let me bring back October 15th, right. How dare a black man even stand up and challenge a white woman? I mean, so black codes, right. Just bias written into it. But I find something else that Zach brought up, and Adam as well, that let's not even go back too far, but let's look at Weed and Seed. Let's look at Operation Hammer. Let's look at broken windows. Let's look at suspicious activity reporting. Let's look at the iWatch program. Let's look at predictive policing. Let's look at Operation Laser. Let's look at chronic offender bulletins. Is that biased policing by any standard at all? Right? Whose standard? Exactly. That's it. Policing. So, in essence, what you're trying to do is to garnish this bullshit that you're trying to lay on us. And of course, academic complicity, you have PhDs who are sellouts who are going to sign on and also advocate for something like that as well. But the spin on the language becomes critical. Community-oriented policing, community policing, procedural justice, and then what the fuck is principled policing? Is that an oxymoron that we have heard of? So I think the point I'm trying to get here is that, you are there. I mean, these folks are the shock absorbers of the system. Yeah. We know that profiling and racism is baked into these programs. We know that they are fundamentally flawed by design, and the only purpose of these programs is the intent to cause harm, right? Manufacturing reasonable suspicion. Right. 500,000 stop and frisks. Just giving a license to racially profile through the See Something, Say Something program. Getting 5,000 volunteers, all white folks, to look out for those threats to the body.
Thank you, sir.
Predictive policing hotspots.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. Thank you, sir. Please have a seat, Mr. Khan. Mr. Khan, please have a seat, sir. Thank you, sir. Ms. Garcia? Ms. Garcia, you're next. Mr. Khan, you're excused from the meeting, sir. Thank you.
You are excused from the meeting. Come on, Eileen. You're a racist.
Thank you, sir. Please leave the meeting. Thank you, sir. You're excused from the meeting. Mr. Khan, I've given you several warnings. Thank you, Mr. Khan. Mr. Khan, you're excused from today's meeting. Mr. Khan, I gave you a warning earlier today, Mr. Khan. You can leave the meeting. If you don't leave the meeting, sir, if you don't leave the meeting, Mr. Akili, stop yelling out. Mr. Akili, you're excused from the meeting as well. Mr. Khan and Mr. Akili, very well. We'll have a recess, We'll go into closed session, and if you're not leaving the room by that point, we will clear the entire room and proceed without all of you. Your choices are Mr. Akili, Mr. Khan needs to leave the meeting, and we're going into closed session.
The Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss item number 4A1 and 2 in accordance with Government Code 54957.
Do a readout of the closed session, please.
Okay. In closed session, item number 4A1 was discussed and the chief's recommendations were unanimously adopted. In closed session, item number 4A2 was discussed and the chief's recommendations were unanimously adopted. We are now back on item number F.
Thank you. The remaining speakers who were scheduled to speak are not here, and therefore, is there a motion to approve the department's report? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It passes 5-0. Before we move on to item G, which members of the commission indicated that they did have questions on, members of the commission indicated they did not have questions on H, I, J, K, L, M, and O. Are there any public comment cards on those items for the individuals here. H, I, J, K, L, M, and
We
O.
have a card on G, I.
I didn't ask for
Okay.
G.
There's no cards on H, no card on J, no card on L, no card on M.
An N?
M as in Mary. There is one card.
An O, excuse me, O?
O, yes.
There is a card. All right. Then with respect to items H, J, L, and M, is there a motion to accept those items as recommended in the agenda?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Those items pass. That's items H, J, L, and M. Moving on then in order, item G. Commander Burt, I understand you're presenting on that.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, Commissioners, Chief, Mr. T-Fank. I'm Commander Jeff Burt. I am working out of the Office of Constitutional Policing and Policy, and I'm joined by Commander Mike Himes from Internal Affairs Group. Today, before you, you have a special order, an administrative order that adds to our list of and redefines our bias policing, what's prohibited in our bias policing policy. Specifically, we added language that prohibits discriminatory conduct based on immigration or employment status, English language fluency, or homeless circumstance. That's updating the manual section 1, SOLTIS 345, and there's a definition in the volume 0 that also is amended to reflect the same. So that's the update to the manual. This is actually came from first the 21st Century Policing Report. The second pillar over policy and oversight recommended that departments adopt and enforce anti-discrimination policies, while the Inspector General's report dated May 2nd, 2017 acknowledged that we broadly do this already, but indicated and made a recommendation that we add these 4 categories, and that's what this order is now doing.
Thank you. Questions from commissioners? No? Sir? I
Thank you,
see
ma'am.
no questions from commissioners. Thank you. Are there public comment cards on G, please?
One moment. We have Jonathan Foster.
Hi, Jonathan Foster. The group that's been around here for a while, they always ask that maybe these meetings could be on a Saturday, and I personally I don't think anybody's coming on Saturday either. Here it is on Tuesday.
Sir, we're here on the change in policy.
Right,
If you
right.
could
Here,
address that.
I'm getting to here we are on Tuesday, and everybody that might have a stake in this can come down here and speak up. Where are they? I mean, we got the group, and I've been involved in this because I got born into this junk. But here it is. Somebody can get in here and give testimony about how to define the terms used in the department manual. Where are they to tell you? They're not here, are they? There's no one to. It's as if no one really cares, to be honest with you. See, either they don't care or they approve of. They don't actually want to participate in this. Do you understand what I'm saying? They're not here to participate. It's like complicitness. But the idea about all this is that we're trying to make the police department better. That's what I've seen. It's not perfect though. It's still killing people. Okay, it's got a problem. But I've dealt with the police department too. I've always tried to say yes sir, no sir, miss, yes officer, blah blah blah. And I've had been talked in circles and everything. But when here it is, no one's down here to change it. You would think there would be 400,000 people waiting outside. Yes, we want this policy changed. Where there's nobody here. No one's ready.
Thank you, sir. Any further questions? Okay. Is there a motion on item G to approve the department's report? Second? Yep. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None, it passes 5-0. Thank you very
And
much.
Commissioner President, if I might, just for a moment, and this is, the importance of this matter is certainly not respected by the gallery today, but this is likely the last opportunity that I'll have to speak before this commission on an individual who I have a great deal of respect for and have, as a professional, as a man who's brought years and decades of service, of public service to law enforcement. And here in Los Angeles, in LAPD, Commander Mike Himes joined us nearly 6 years ago as in a civilian capacity, and we were smart enough and wise enough under then Chief Beck to allow him to migrate over to a police commander's position, which is unique within our organization. But a man uniquely qualified in our harm reduction efforts, has done a tremendous job in Professional Standards Bureau, as I think demonstrated today in his testimony, and now is taking the next chapter where he's transitioning as a deputy chief to the Port Police, of the Los Angeles Port Police, shortly. And I just want to say thank you, Mike. I'm going to miss you. I'm going to miss your work, your expertise, your passion for this, your fairness, your even keel. But yet I know that as a partner agency with the Port Police, that your leadership there will continue to ensure the safety of Los Angeles. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief.
Absolutely. And on behalf of all the commission members, we want to thank you very much for your service and what you've done for this department and our city. I mean, you've been at LAWA, now you're going to the port. You truly are a law enforcement, public safety professional that's done so much for this city. And as a resident of this city, as all of us are, thank you for what you do to try to improve our city every single day. So thank you, Commander.
Thank you very much.
If you can negotiate into your new contract that you can spend Tuesday mornings with us as a member of the public, I'd be happy to have you.
As long as I can be a public speaker.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks all. Have a nice day.
You too. We've handled item H. Next up in order is item I related to the DNA grant. A number of the next items are grants. Commissioners, any questions on that particular grant? No? Did we have a public comment card on that?
Item I, we have Jonathan Foster.
Mr. Foster, do you wish to speak regarding the grant for DNA capacity enhancement?
For DNA, yes, absolutely. Again, as I've pointed out, we're missing trillions of dollars, and LA has a budget problem with coming up on how to fund all this DNA analysis that needs to be done. I think there's been some rewording on rape kits that didn't show up in this. There have been a lot of rapes, and girls did not get their justice. I sometimes had wondered if it was part of, so to speak, the scheme of sanctuary city policy and like a special order 40 policy that hasn't gone away, where an illegal alien gets to rape somebody and then the DNA kit doesn't get examined, and so we never found out who the rapist was. So if we had the trillions, that doesn't mean the rapes will stop. They hung next to Jesus. They hung a thief and a murderer, and they've still been thieving and murdering since Jesus. So I don't know if this is going to change anything either. But I approve the money because it needs to be done. So, but in knowing now what the real root of the problem is that every single American faces comes out of what's happening with the Pentagon, then we know that maybe some of these women that didn't get their justice actually could have gotten their justice. And another one I've spoken about, well, probably I can't say anything. Anyways, can't talk about that.
Thank you, sir. Chief, just so we have a accurate record on this, with respect to the rape kit DNA backlog, the City of Los Angeles, LAPD, still has zero backlog. Is that correct?
That is correct, Commissioner. This affords us the ability to enhance our DNA throughput.
Very good. Thank you. Is there a motion? And the requested action is to approve the report and transmit concurrently to the Mayor and City Council. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? It passes 5-0. We've handled item J. Moving on then to item K on our agenda. Commissioners, was there a question? No. Is there a public comment card on item K?
Jonathan Foster.
Mr. Foster, sir?
There's been a lot of discussion about how dealing with the mentally ill has gone the wrong way with the Los Angeles Police Department. And there's been a lot of, I approved the grant, but there's been a lot of discussion about training police officers to deal with people who have mental health issues on a much better basis, which is awesome. I mean, that's great. However, one of the things I thought about, though, and this is, of course, the group's not here to jump on me, but they probably see it anyways, and I support their efforts. I think it's probably good efforts in some ways. But I just don't want it to turn into where the police department shows up and says, "Oh, hi, sir. Oh, I'll kill you." Oh, well, we brought some flowers and some chocolates. Would you like to sit down with our mental health evaluator? I'll kill you. Oh, sir, we brought water and a chair. I mean, how far do you have to go with somebody who actually really may be mentally ill? We don't want to beat them down, but this puts the police department in a lot of danger, more danger than they're dealing with. I say that with this group here, they'll jump on me, and I support them jumping on me. They don't like what I say, that's cool, but that's what they do. And it's valid, but I also don't want to put the police department in more harm than it's actually dealing with, where we're going to be so nice to somebody that really may knock your head off. You know what I mean? And I also don't even enjoy the idea of police departments and dealing with, putting people in handcuffs and stuff. It just is hard for me to accept as I got born into this thing. But I want to protect the police department. I think it goes a little too far, maybe. Maybe it goes a little too far. You guys still killing people, and we haven't heard about that yet, lately, so maybe some good things.
Thank you, sir. The recommended action is to approve the department's report, transmit concurrently to the mayor and city council. Is there a motion? All in favor? Oh, second, excuse me? Second. And all in favor? Aye. Opposed? That passes as well. We handled L and M. For the moment, I'm going to put aside item N because I know there are questions. Item O, I believe there are no questions by the commissioners. And is there a public comment card on O?
Jonathan Foster, please.
Mr. Foster, on item O, sir, the contract with the Superior Court, sir.
Yeah, on the contract with the Superior Court, the judge makes 90% of his income in retirement. That's why they want their money. The whole thing is a money scheme. Now, how does that work, though, if somebody murders somebody else and they got to take it down there? But this is on traffic citations, so we're just pulling people over, issuing, sometimes if they don't have the insurance, they don't have keep up on the car, it causes an accident, kills people. So somebody made a law, so we have to try to follow these laws. But here they are, Superior Court's trying to make sure it gets paid because it's got to pay the judge who is completely overpaid. I mean, at one time, the judge was a freshman in high school. Now he's a judge, gets to make 90% of his income. And I mean, these are the kinds of things that should be taken care of. I don't know how a judge can do that, how they have laws that were written in policy where a judge can do that kind of stuff. But that's really what that's about. I don't approve it.
Thank you, sir. The recommended action is to approve the department's report and transmit to the mayor. Is there a motion? It is moved. Is it seconded? Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That item passes. Returning then to item N, and I know that there are commission questions on item N. And the item is for the extension of the National Crime Statistics Exchange Assistance Program. Good morning.
Good morning.
Afternoon,
Good
excuse me.
afternoon. Information System Manager Monique Turner from the Application Development and Support Division.
Welcome. Welcome. If you could give us just a broad overview of what this item is for the benefit of all the commissioners.
So this is an extension for a study for the department to switch over from UCR reporting to NIBRS for the FBI. And this study is done by, It's done by the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and this is just an extension so that we can keep continuing on what changes needs to be made within a department and within the new records management system, so that we can start collecting information and reporting effective January 1st, 2021.
And this is a national requirement that the FBI has been trying to implement for many years, correct?
That is correct.
And my understanding is that they're asking all departments to be part of the new NIMBR system, the more robust data collection system. I thought the deadline was 2020, but maybe that's December 31st, 2020, or January 1st, 2021 is more correct. Okay, so we have a year. Do you think even with this extension we're going to meet the deadline?
Based on the project plan for the records management system, it should be. I don't have the exact details of the progress of the project plan, but I can provide that information if needed.
I think that might be helpful. Obviously, we'd like to, we know this has been an enormous effort on behalf of the FBI to get more robust data in the hopes that it will help all of law enforcement to be able to allocate its resources to current crimes. And to get all that information. It's important. I understand a big department and many departments all around the country have been having an enormous problem transitioning to this new system because of the amount of data it intends to collect. But I think we're all hopeful that that will actually come to fruition if LAPD can do it. I think it'll be, as you say in the report, a good model for other cities and police departments to be able to follow. Were there other questions from the commissioners?
And I just may want to add
yes.
that we do have the NIBRS component, but because Cal DOJ has their own flavor, and it's called Cybers, so there's additional fields that we will have to collect. And as of, I think, we're still not, we still haven't been provided all of the additional fields that Cal DOJ will have to collect on type of NIBRS, so we are working on that as well.
So the state is having greater requirements, and is that the focus of the effort over the next year, or is it also with the federal program?
It's both.
It's both, okay.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Questions? Mr. Bonner?
Yeah, so what I'm trying to understand from just a broad standpoint is, first of all, there's a couple of references here to the focus of this being transitioning from the current uniform crime reporting to the NIBRS. But what does the department get out of this? I mean, what is it going to, when it's all said and done, when we've fully complied, when the NIBRS system is in place, all the rest, what does it allow us to do then that we can't do now, or what benefit are we really getting out of it?
From a federal standpoint, now departments countrywide will be able to be compared with the same type of data. Currently, the data that's being collected is more aggregate information. The new IBRS or NIBRS data has more granular information. So one of the key differences of how we collect data now, it's for any incident, the most serious offense is collected. With NIBRS, it will be up to 10 offenses. And it's more granularly detailed regarding the suspects, regarding the victims. We'll give you more better data analysis on what we have now. The information that we're collecting today is more summary information.
So when you refer to data analysis, again, when we think of what it is that we're able to do when this is complete versus what we're able to do now, can you give me a little flavor of that in terms of what that analysis might be? I understand the big thrust of this is to have incident level reporting and it's more granular as you suggest, but what do we intend to do with it? Are we going to do, where I'm getting at is a lot of this also appears to be focused on the elements of some of the relatively basic elements of the crime and the incident and how it's treated, but will it do anything to enhance our ability to understand use of force, bias policing, any of the other things that we typically or we have been putting a lot of priority on?
I don't have a complete answer at this point because there's 56 elements that we're collecting. But I can definitely give you more info. I can provide a
So,
report later on.
if I understand your role, you're more on the IT side and complying. And I think Commissioner Bonner's questions are more broadly about how the department's going to use this enhanced data. And so what might be helpful is, Mr. T-Fank, if down the road we could get a broader presentation on this. What I know about the system in what the FBI is trying to achieve frequently is, as you know from the statistics we get, it's so focused on Part 1 crimes, sometimes Part 2, it's intended to broaden the number of crimes. And one example that I'm aware of is like with computer crimes, how many of these activities are being facilitated by the use of computers, and to get a better sense of crime in America. But I think Mr. Bonner's question is a very good one as to, once there's that more robust data, what does the department intend to do with it? And it might be a little premature since we don't, if I understand, you don't have the data yet, Chief. But
yeah, so a couple points I would add is that the report references this effort, this transition is part of a requirement at the state and federal level for a reporting standard. Intermixed with this effort is a modernization and updating of a manner in which we record crime, capture it, analyze it, and report back. So this is a portion of a much larger endeavor. This 5-year plan that I've referenced earlier of modernizing our systems, you'll see on the first page, it talks about the very way in which we intake reports. By modernizing our record management system, it gives us, an opportunity to be NIBIN compliant, which we could not be. It would be very difficult to do so now with our current system, but also the way in which we capture, the very essence of how we capture a report, whether it's on a tablet, whether it's in person, whether it's telephonically, the whole enterprise is changing. And I think that it would be worthwhile is that we could give you perhaps a high-level overview of how what the expected outcomes are. I know that one of the primary expected outcomes is not just the ability to be more granular in analysis, but particularly on cybercrime, because UCR standards were created in 1934 or so, long before cyber was even a word. So today, the nature of crime today, the NIBIN standards or crime classes and codes are meant to accommodate more sophisticated and present-day types of crime and public safety issues. But the other matter that this is meant to do is when you look at a kidnapping versus a robbery, in the current UCR standard, we only report the robbery. While we know about the kidnapping, because it's a higher precedence of this mechanism which UCR is made up, America has a bit of a distorted look at how it classifies crime. And this is meant to be more expansive, to pick up issues like the criticality of human trafficking and sexual exploitation and challenges that we see today that as a society we're much more sophisticated in trying to understand. But again, I think this would be, there's I think a way of presenting this information to update you, and in there will be monies that this grant is going to support a needed transition, but also a modernization. A very small part of the modernization will be funded by this little portion.
And to follow up on one other question that Commissioner Bonner asked with respect to use of force, I understand that separately the FBI has requested departments to begin reporting use of force, and I think it's starting next year, if I'm not mistaken.
We're already reporting it.
That is AB 71. That's the IRSIS data collection that we started in 2015.
Okay, but nationwide they're going to be collecting that, and then there'll be another database and statistics where the comparison and contrast can happen. Mm-hmm. My understanding.
Yeah, and it all makes sense. Although again, just going very high level, and it's my general understanding that a lot of this there was a period of time from about 2008 to about 2016 or thereabout. And this is when we had the White House. 21st Century Policing Task Force. You had the White House Police Data Initiative, I think, was somewhat part of that. And in that process, there was not only the conversation about the needs to capture better data nationally and consistency and so on, but a lot of it was talked about against the backdrop of 21st century policing. Right. What does it better enable us to do? Not only the use of technology and so on, but to address crime, but also then to know also more about the policing itself, and the attributes and conduct and so on and so forth. So I'm wanting to make sure that in some places I perceive the department to be far out in front of many other departments in terms of those that are reporting in and those things of that nature. But I want to make sure that it's not being thought of only as an enhanced technology that you'll be able to use multiple devices to take reports and all those kind of things, which are great, but that we're thinking of it also as to how it's going to better enhance and round out some of the other social justice types initiatives that the department is supportive of and will want to be leading on, continuing to lead on.
My compliments to the Department of Justice. And the National Incident-Based Reporting Standards actually was created in the early 1990s. And it recognized that instances of crime, there's many other aspects of non-crime. There's the initial call of the police, there's response of law enforcement, there's reaction of what happens in that interaction and exchange, the cradle-to-grave involvement, if you will, of the criminal justice system. And that UCR was too isolated and too narrow in its what it captured. And National Incident-Based Standards encourages agencies to look at our current 26 different systems that capture crime and all the activities of policing and tie it all together, integrate it so that it is interrelated, as you've indicated, and we can understand those interrelationships, so that when we ask about a use of force, everything that's associated with those other what are currently proprietary systems are all interconnected. So we can do that type of analysis that cuts and dices this information from several different angles to try to understand relationships and interplay.
Excellent. Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, are there any public comment cards on this item?
We have Jonathan Foster.
Mr. Foster.
Hi, Jonathan Foster. I did some homework on this, and then my iPad battery is dead, so I guess I didn't follow through with all my hard work. Just goes out the window. With the Fed involved, and there's a type of quid pro quo. That word is thrown around a lot right now with the Trump-a-trough guy in there. The quid pro quo. Here it's not as full-blown, though. The type of, But the money they give is so chintzy in comparison to what the Pentagon has stolen from everyone. By the standard, the FBI is funding this program through the LAPD, has made the entire LAPD an employee of the FBI, or maybe a self-contractor, right? So by force, because the FBI wants this, they want you to do this. What are you going to say, no to the FBI? No, we don't want to do this. What are they going to do to you? See, the FBI is going to become a bully, isn't it, to the LAPD? Right, you're going to tell it no. The FBI should match the entire budget of the LAPD. Whatever your budget is, the FBI should pay you exactly that. That way you people can get paid twice for what you're doing. Remember, they're losing trillions by a wink, wink, nod, nod. We got the money to pay everybody twice. Or maybe pay you by the hour. If you do 5 minutes of work for the FBI, they have to pay you for the full hour. But they're not doing this, though, see? And this is why I want to be the president. I get everybody paid and everybody off the street and get the crime could go way down to like nothing. You could all of a sudden chop the LAPD in half. Across the nation this could take place. But we're missing all the money that really makes the nation whole and could make your jobs a lot easier is gone to ruthless, mean people.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. The requested action is to approve the department's report and transmit concurrently to the mayor and city council. Is there a motion?
So moved.
A second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That passes. Opposed? It passes 5-0. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chief, we're up to the chief report.
Thank you, Commissioners. It's been a couple weeks, so I want to report on a variety of subjects. First, let me address any officer-involved shooting that occurred during this period of time. We did have one officer-involved shooting that occurred on the 22nd of October at approximately 9:40 in the evening at the 120 block of South Gless Street. This is in the Hollenbeck area of LAPD, of LA City. On that date, 3 uniformed officers that were assigned to the Hollenbeck Area Special Problems Unit were in the area of 1st and Gless Street looking for a named homicide suspect by the name of Rodolfo Coleman. Mr. Rodolfo Coleman is a male Hispanic, approximately 29 years of age. The officers were in an unmarked police vehicle, and after turning southbound on Gless from 1st Street, they observed Mr. Coleman walking on the west sidewalk. As they stopped and began to exit their vehicle, Mr. Coleman fired an unknown type of firearm at the officers, resulting in an officer-involved shooting. Mr. Coleman then fled southbound on Gless and west through the houses. A perimeter was established and a canine search for Mr. Coleman was conducted utilizing officers from Metropolitan Special Weapons and Tactics. The search proved unsuccessful as Mr. Coleman was not located that evening, and at the point of this investigation that night, one of our officers did receive a minor abrasion to his right knee. We don't believe that it was, at this point, from gunfire. We think it was from shattered glass that occurred as this officer-involved shooting occurred. Force Investigation Division responded and handled the administrative investigation, and the criminal investigation was also handled by their criminal apprehension team. They began coordinating their efforts with our Gang Narcotics Division FBI Task Force and the Hollenbeck Area Homicide Unit. Mr. Coleman was later taken into custody on the 24th of October by the FBI Gang Narcotics Division Task Force, where he was booked for murder. It's my understanding he sustained no injuries as a result of this officer-involved shooting. The district attorney's team, officer-involved shooting team, did not roll out that night. However, the Inspector General's was there, as is consistent with our protocol. Relative to officer-involved shootings, one other matter I wanted to address before I get into significant events was to make a statement in the aftermath of this board's actions concerning the shooting death of Mr. Albert Ramon Dorsey in the Hollywood Division that occurred on the 28th of last year. The charter, as you know, authorizes me as the Chief of Police to discipline officers up to and including their removal, subject to the department policies and provisions of the charter and the government code. In weighing my decisions of whether or not to seek to impose discipline in this incident, I've taken into consideration the totality of the circumstances, the recommendation of the Department's Use of Force Review Board, my own assessment of the officer's actions, and the closed session discussion and findings of this commission. In addition, I reviewed the officer's work history, including their prior disciplinary action, if any, as well as any prior use of deadly force and the officer's overall performance. Ultimately, in this instance, my decision was to direct the officer who used deadly force involving Mr. Dorsey to a Department Board of Rights hearing for termination. The second officer, I took disciplinary action, and that officer has opted for a Board of Rights in lieu of my proposed discipline. Given this is a personnel matter and the Board of Rights process is still pending, state law prohibits me from discussing more information at this time. So in summary, the outcome of this officer-involved shooting, which, as a reminder, my findings and recommendation of this board was administrative disapproval on the tactics that both officers employed. I did recommend to this board that the use of deadly force itself be found in policy. The board unanimously found the shooting out of policy and administratively disapproved the tactics. So that came back to me for determination of whether to impose discipline. That decision has now been made, and one officer has been directed to a Board of Rights for termination, and he is going through that matter now. The second officer, which I recommended for proposed discipline, pursuant to their rights, opted to have their matter heard before a Department Board of Rights. Given the state law and privacy rights of the involved officers, I'm precluded from discussing further about that. As to the other transitioning over to a number of significant events that occurred over this past week in our efforts of engagement and work in our communities, I was happy to attend and stand in strong partnership with the Under Armour Corporation as well as the Cal Ripken Foundation at the Weingart YMCA Youth Center a couple weeks ago. The partnership of Under Armour and Cal Ripken is across America, they are teaming with the YMCA and other youth centers to restore and expand the ability of those centers to support after-school activities in the youth. The LAPD's involvement in this instance is that we have a cadet post at that location where our relationship with the YMCA continues to expand in their interest in our youth activities being supported by their youth centers. This helps us with capacity and allows our officers to be mentors and provide interactions with children in facilities that are well maintained and equipped to deal with the various type of activities that youth seek in after school and weekend activities. Additionally, last week I attended with a number of other senior staff from the department the annual International Association of Chiefs of Police and Major Cities Chief Conferences that were in Chicago. Over that period of time, we listened to a number of and heard from a number of our federal and state partners as to various criminal justice initiatives, as well as discussed matters between major agencies of challenges that we all face and opportunities in policing America's big cities. During the latter portion of that, on that Monday morning, as has been reported and seen, Los Angeles experienced a significant and potentially catastrophic fire known as a Getty fire. I'm proud of the leadership of this department and the men and women who joined in a unified command with LA Fire as well as our DOT and other emergency responders to support the evacuations, as LA Fire did an immediate number of rescues of individuals that were stranded in the hillsides there. And while we provided for safe evacuations and security of the area, I'm also proud of the work that we did as fire quickly gained control of that. And while we lost devastatingly too many homes with 12 structures lost, thousands were saved. And through the quick work of LA Fire, we were able to establish safe revisiting of areas to allow a large population of individuals who in the middle of the night had to immediately get ready, set, and go from their location. And the 48 hours after that, we were able to facilitate revisiting so that they could update their supplies, their resources, pick up pets or animals that they may have left behind, and then also within 72 hours have much of the area repopulated. So again, this is the third fire, major significant fire that this region has experienced in about 45 days. And I cannot stress enough how proud I am of the men and women of this department, as well as all first responders in this region who have demonstrated their valiantry in not just responding to those and protecting property, but ensuring the safety of everyone involved. However, I do think that what we're learning from this, as we see in other parts of the state, is that there is a continued need for the general public to improve their resilience. Today, our reliance on cell phones, on power in our homes, on readiness of local stores and retail establishments to support our day-to-day needs is, I believe, we're overly dependent. And our ability as a community to be able to withstand and be self-reliant for 3 to 7 days is a standing need, and this most recent fire is yet another example of why, as we live in earthquake country. Moving over to next couple of events, we last week under the sponsorship of the City Attorney's Office as well as Mayor Garcetti's office, we had our Domestic Abuse Response Team Awards Luncheon, where I attended the luncheon that allowed us to recognize 4 individual officers and their families, members of one of the 21 DART teams that are across the city. It was one of the capstone events of the month of October, which is Domestic Violence Prevention Month, and it was an opportunity for me to recognize their work and draw importance to what they to the roles they play in preventing and also helping survivors of domestic violence recover. The 2 other matters I want to address is on Sunday we had a interfaith street festival called LA Heart. It was hosted by the Islamic Center of Southern California. And this street fair, which was under the leadership of the Human Relations Commission of the Mayor's Office, as well as City Attorney Fuhrer, allowed us, as well as a number of interfaith communities, to come together and have an afternoon of fun, festivities, some food, some enjoyment with young children as they made various entertainment and presentations, but really just an afternoon to enjoy Los Angeles and all its diversity and its ability and its wisdom of inclusion. Lastly, last night was our 27th annual Chaplain Banquet, an opportunity for us to recognize and say thank you to the Chaplain Corps, who as volunteers, trained volunteers, are readily available to our men and women within the department to provide important services and support for them. As we saw in Chicago at our conference, one of the most pressing crises we have today is us coming to terms and recognizing the risk of suicide that is plaguing this profession. We lose far more officers to suicide than we do at the hands of an assailant or as a result of a traffic collision. And the wellness of our personnel in their resiliency is aided when we recognize that and we call out that seeking support and assistance from others is a strength and is a virtue, and is one that in a profession that over the years exposes officers and personnel to such tragic circumstances of human existence that it's important. It's an important resource. I'm proud of the work of our Chaplain Corps in providing that to our first responders in casual encounters as well as more formal settings, as well as their ability during times of crisis to respond to communities and support those same the broader community in need. Moving over to our crime, we continue to see an overall reduction in both violent and property crime. We stand today with 940 fewer violent crimes year to date, with 6,558 fewer property crimes for overall Part 1 crime reduction of 6.9% as we end October, and over a 2-year period that's a reduction of 7.7%. This week we saw us turn into the black in regards to reduction of shooting victims, something that I've reported regularly to this board. As of this past Saturday, we now stand at a 2.6% reduction in the number of shooting victims. That's 22 fewer shooting victims than we had last year, and that's more than a 7% reduction over a 2-year period. When I look at what's contributing to that and understanding it, I think it's a combination of effective work with our interventionists, with our ability to work with them as partners in understanding emerging and ongoing festering gang feuds and turmoil, and settling those matters with people not resorting to violence. Make no mistake, we still have far too much violence in the city with 221 homicides year to date, but these are numbers that are bucking the trend by others who would predict that these numbers would be going up rather than going down. Matter of officer-involved shootings, as I reported, the 22nd shooting, this Hollenbeck shooting I just reported to you, that's 22 officer-involved shootings this year. Last year, that number was 27 for an 18% reduction. Our 4-year average would be 35, which represents nearly a 38% reduction. We've had 9 fatal officer-involved shootings this year. That number last year stood at 11. And over a 4-year average was just under 15. Regarding traffic collisions, our pressure continues to be with motor vehicles versus PED in serious injuries involving death and serious injuries involving bicyclists. So I ask for the public's continued vigilance on that, to be mindful of the road and the rights of all, as well as our efforts of going out and taking enforcement to hold those who are distracted or not paying attention to the rules of the road. Lastly, in regards to the personnel strength of the department, we stand at 10,002 sworn members of the department as of October 26th. Our personnel strength as civilians is 2,952. We have 389 reserve officers, and we hold at 1,724 cadets, and that concludes my report. Happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you. Questions, commissioners?
Chief, do you know the new commissioner in New York, Commissioner Shea?
Yes, we have met and discussed issues earlier in his previous capacity as chief of detectives And so, yes, we have a working relationship.
Good.
Other questions? And Chief, I want to be sure we join in thanking all the men and women in the department that helped all the residents in Los Angeles who were victims of the fire and had to evacuate very quickly and had a very stressful week last week. So thank you for the entire team and for helping to preserve all of their lives. I think we all appreciate that. And also, I'd just like to also acknowledge everyone who was acknowledged at the DART luncheon. I know that's been a great effort of building up those teams and that collaboration and helping victims of domestic violence through these very important programs that are now throughout the city. So thank you for that. And for the rest of your report, Commissioner Bonner, did you have anything?
Yeah, I had a question, your comments about the suicides.
Yes.
And I don't know what the department's history has been. I know that statewide in 2008-9 there was a little spike at one point in time for various reasons, but I'm just wondering what that picture looks like relative to the where the department fits into that picture. Also, what we know, if anything, about any trends as to I know that the emotional challenge of the profession is significant across the board, particularly. As it ties back to just the hypervigilance and all of the issues around that. But are they young officers, older, experienced officers? Are they married, single, across the board, or are we seeing any trends that are? And then lastly, I know the department's made available a number of services that are available. What do we know about the uptake, in that regard?
So a variety of questions in there. So let me talk, first of all, that in the last 20 years, the department has lost 38 employees to suicide. As we look at the number of officers who have fallen in line of duty, that number is 18. So well over twice the number. The instances of suicide in Los Angeles, this past summer, we lost a detective to suicide. Detective Parcell from Valley Bureau Homicide. I attended his funeral, mourned with his family, his colleagues, and as a department. His loss represented the first suicide in more than 2 years as an organization. The average of the organization has been one or more per year. The efforts of our Behavioral Science Service section, an organization celebrating its 50th anniversary, made up of 17 police psychologists, which is an important distinction in the psychology field, I think has made tremendous progress over the last 20 years in trying to combat this trauma, this affliction that we have. I think law enforcement overall is at times been under the misimpression that we have a lower rate of suicide per capita than the general public. That would be true. It's true when you look at the broad spectrum of the general public, but when you look at the spectrum in which we pull from as police officers, which we screen so many factors away from what a successful applicant is, as far as their mental resilience and capacities, their ability to withstand conflict and work through that successfully, they should be more resilient. And so this rate of suicide we're coming to terms with recognizing that they start off with a higher rate of resilience, but then there was a term that was coined this past conference that called the 30-year drip. And it speaks to the cumulative total of the ongoing trauma and renewal of that trauma from one incident to the next. Law enforcement, and particularly LAPD, has taken very specific steps to try to counter that trauma through debriefing, through recognizing cooling off periods, if you will, pulling people out of field assignments or away from tasks to give them time to normalize, if you will, back to a sense of stability without being, and trying to avoid what others would call the PTSD and the syndromes of repeated trauma exposure and the impact that has on people's emotional wellness, whether they become hypervigilant, whether they suffer from depression and bouts of anxiety and other challenges. Our employee wellness efforts as a department, we last year started the first Heart of LAPD to bring together on that day more than 700 department personnel and their families, survivors, family members who were survivors of suicide, members of this department who had taken their life, to come together and join together to speak as a family that we need to be better partners with one another and interact and stop a person and provide help and assistance. And that conversely, no one ever pulls away from a radio when they need help to ask for help. And that help when asking when they find themselves in a rabbit hole, or they find themselves experiencing dark thoughts and depression, is to reaching out for us is a strength and a virtue. However, I want to say thank you to the LAPPL, who 2 months ago put out a survey to its membership asking questions relative to their experience with stress, their experiences with depression, their experiences with suicidal thoughts, their experiences with seeking help and assistance, and whether there was a taint or a discrimination. They thought that they would be tarnished if they sought such assistance. So I appreciate and welcome their digging into that difficult subject. I was troubled by the reactions. The reactions identified, self-reported by those that did participate in the survey, a continuing high level of a perception that reaching out for help could make them, that individual being viewed as being in a weakened position, or may bring some consequence to them, or have an adverse impact on their reputation or their suitability for promotion or even the field. That disappoints me because our efforts, whether it's peer counseling, psychologists, clergy, peers, your partner, no one fights alone. The strategies that we work through as a team, through a team, and those strategies apparently are not working universally when it comes to our rank and file feeling that they can be vulnerable in this area without being ridiculed. So we have more work to do, and I know that every member of this organization is committed from the very top to the entry-level recruit to do better at this. And as we move forward, we will.
On the PPL survey, was there, just anecdotally, I've been talking with some officers, I've heard some even reacting negatively to the notion or the term behavioral health. The concern being that it somehow suggests that there's a behavioral problem, or that there's, but that there's a problem with therapy. So some misunderstand that term, I think, is what I'm saying. Was there any discussion or thought about how to make the services available a little more?
So one of the current endeavors that the League has joined us with is to set up an opportunity to have a checkup, if you will, with mental health professionals, with BSS, as recurring as we do with our dental, with our vision, and with our physical health. Is that no one goes to the doctor for a physical or goes to the dentist for an exam as a point of weakness, but rather as a preventive measure, and recognizing that the human body is frail and that we age and we have things happen to us that are no fault of our own. And I'm really proud of the leadership within the board of directors, because from LEPPL, they have stepped into this conversation to say, periodically, if everyone were to do such a session, how much would it further dismiss this negative slant that sitting down with a psychologist has, this bias that may be cooked into a profession that has had a certain bravado and a certain masculinity in its past and in its origins, that the ability to step forward and ask for help is, in fact, just as you would with having a tumor or some other ailment that you would not. There are people who want to ignore that because they want to ignore it and make it go away, but no one looks at that seeking help in that instance as a point of weakness. And we need to do everything that we can so that seeking help and assistance from a partner, a friend, a family member, or a psychologist or chaplain or peer member is seen in a similar way.
Thank you. Let me just lastly say that have an interest in continuing the conversation. Also, in part because the suicide and those rates are troubling enough, but there's a lot of others who don't, where that's not the outcome, but there's a lot of suffering nonetheless. And so I want to make sure that it's thought of as not only how to address that one outcome, but a broad concern, as you were articulating, for just the emotional health and mental health of everyone who's asked to do this work. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from commissioners? Are there public comment cards on the chief's report?
We have one, Jonathan Foster.
Mr. Foster.
Jonathan Foster. It wasn't in the Dewey case. It wasn't a lack of power, pride, or honor, or like words to have two smaller officers call for backup when the guy was much bigger than the two officers. This concept, though, can bring harm to officers, but you have backup, you have guns, and when the suspect didn't comply, so things went the wrong way. So when you all get it right, though, who will get the praise? The LAPD. That's right. That's who will get the praise. You talk a lot about suicide, so I have to comment about it. Critical brain chemical balance is the reason for suicide. If a person who's got the proper brain chemistry going on in their brain and they run into a situation that would probably make somebody want to kill themselves, do you know if they have the right brain chemicals, they will not commit suicide? It's this simple. You have the wrong brain chemicals going on through the synapses as they send off their electrical, and then you will end up killing yourself. It's this simple. Thank you to Dr. Albert Hoffman, the guy who made the LSD. The peyote and the mushrooms will help you, but they got him all criminalized. The other part I want to speak about. Crime reduction is not Special Order 40 with your gang problem. You got to get rid of Special Order 40. I'd seen in some of the stuff we went over today, it talked about human trafficking. Again, Special Order 40 is enabling human trafficking, and you won't get rid of it. This is a problem. Pot busts. Well, George Washington grew pot. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to general public comment. Are there any cards submitted?
One, Jonathan Foster.
Mr. Foster.
Let's see if I can
Sir.
find this page. Probably not in enough time. Yeah, I had said this before. In LA, I had said that Trump had pulled out the troops, and we found out that they got Baghdadi. And this was a guy who was shooting Christians in the back of the head. But again, if we've got a budget problem that Chief, are you going to not pay your taxes? No, you're going to pay your taxes. That's right, because they're going to come for you if you don't. And if you give them a problem, they'll take their gun out, and boom, boom, boom you. So you got to do what they say. We all have to. You're not absolved from the IRS. So we got $53 trillion. It basically has gone to Israel, you see. And nobody can say anything about it. And then when it's cloaked in secrecy, then if I come up here, I talk about the problems that we are experiencing as a whole people, as we the people, we find that it's going to one specific religion for one specific group of people in a country that's only the size of Maryland. And it got, over the last 65 years, it got about $1 trillion a year out of us. And now we have a homeless problem. It sucks to be white and only a little bit of Choctaw Indian and have everybody around here and have a jazz degree and come out at 2 years old, with talent that I don't even want to use to sell cigarettes and alcohol. I love black people so much. I laugh the most with them. They had the funniest jokes. They seem to be the most joyful people I ever been around, and yet they all over here homeless, and I just cry about it sometimes. And then when I'm finding out all this wonderful people that are ahead of me with such power know that the Pentagon is stealing our money and sending it to some other country, and nothing gets done, and now we got these problems. Take care.
Thank you, sir. Is there a motion to adjourn? And second, all in favor? Aye. It passes 5-0. Thank you very much. See you next week.
You made my day.